Welcome to the enlightening world of Buddhist Audio Bookshelf. Today, we embark on a transformative journey as we delve into the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra, a revered text within Buddhist literature. This scripture is a treasure trove of teachings that provide deep insights into the nature of reality, wisdom, and the path to enlightenment. Our aim is to make these profound teachings accessible to all, whether you're a seasoned Buddhist practitioner or a newcomer to Buddhist philosophy. To facilitate your exploration, we have meticulously curated the complete playlist in the video description. It's an open invitation to immerse yourself in the entire collection of teachings from the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra. Join us in this quest for spiritual understanding and growth, as we unlock the timeless wisdom within the sutra's verses. Your engagement is invaluable, so please subscribe, like, and share to expand the reach of these teachings, enabling more individuals to benefit from the profound wisdom of the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra. Let's get started, shall we? 4. The reluctance of the Bodhisattvas. Then, the Buddha said to the Bodhisattva Maitreya, go to the Lakavi Vimalakirti to inquire about his illness. Maitreya replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember that one day I was engaged in a conversation with the gods of the two-seated heaven, the god Samshasita and his retinue, about the stage of non-regression of the great bodhisattvas. At that time, the Lakavi Vimalakirti came there and addressed me as follows. Maitreya, the Buddha has prophesied that only one more birth stands between you and unexcelled perfect enlightenment. What kind of birth does this prophecy concern, Maitreya? Is it past? Is it future? Or is it present? If it is a past birth, it is already finished. If it is a future birth, it will never arrive. If it is a present birth, it does not abide. For the Buddha has declared, Bhikshus, in a single moment, you are born, you age, you die, you transmigrate, and you are reborn. Then might the prophecy concern birthlessness? But birthlessness applies to the stage of destiny for the ultimate, in which there is neither prophecy nor attainment of perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Maitreya, is your reality from birth? Or is it from cessation? Your reality as prophesied is not born and does not cease, nor will it be born and nor will it cease. Furthermore, your reality is just the same as the reality of all living beings, the reality of all things, and the reality of all the holy ones. If your enlightenment can be prophesied in such a way, so can that of all living beings. Why? Because reality does not consist of duality or of diversity. Maitreya, whenever you attain Buddhahood, which is the perfection of enlightenment, at the same time all living beings will also attain ultimate liberation. Why? The Tathagatas do not enter ultimate liberation until all living beings have entered ultimate liberation. For, since all living beings are utterly liberated, the Tathagatas see them as having the nature of ultimate liberation. Therefore, Maitreya, do not fool and delude these deities. No one abides in, or regresses from, enlightenment. Maitreya, you should introduce these deities to the repudiation of all discriminative constructions concerning enlightenment. Enlightenment is perfectly realized neither by the body nor by the mind. Enlightenment is the eradication of all marks. Enlightenment is free of presumptions concerning all objects. Enlightenment is free of the functioning of all intentional thoughts. Enlightenment is the annihilation of all convictions. Enlightenment is free from all discriminative constructions. Enlightenment is free from all vacillation, mentation, and agitation. Enlightenment is not involved in any commitments. Enlightenment is the arrival at detachment, through freedom from all habitual attitudes. The ground of enlightenment is the ultimate realm. Enlightenment is realization of reality. Enlightenment abides at the limit of reality. Enlightenment is without duality, since therein are no minds and no things. Enlightenment is equality, since it is equal to infinite space. Enlightenment is unconstructed, because it is neither born nor destroyed, neither abides nor undergoes any transformation. Enlightenment is the complete knowledge of the thoughts, deeds, and inclinations of all living beings. Enlightenment is not a door for the six media of sense. Enlightenment is unadulterated, since it is free of the passions of the instinctually driven succession of lives. Enlightenment is neither somewhere nor nowhere, abiding in no location or dimension. Enlightenment, not being contained in anything, does not stand in reality. Enlightenment is merely a name, and even that name is unmoving. Enlightenment is without subjectivity and completely without object. Enlightenment, which penetrates the equality of all things, is undifferentiated. Enlightenment, which is not shown by any example, is incomparable. Enlightenment is subtle, since it is extremely difficult to realize. Enlightenment is all-pervasive, as it has the nature of infinite space. Enlightenment cannot be realized, either physically or mentally. Why? The body is like grass, trees, walls, paths, and hallucinations. And the mind is immaterial, invisible, baseless, and unconscious. Lord, when Vimalakirti had discoursed thus, 200 of the deities in that assembly attained a tolerance of birthlessness. As for me, Lord, I was rendered speechless. Therefore, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the young Lakavi Prabhavyuha, go to the Lakavi Vimalakirti to inquire about his illness. Prabhavyuha replied, Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember one day, when I was going out of the great city of the Sali, I met the Lakavi Vimalakirti coming in. He greeted me, and I then addressed him. Householder, where do you come from? He replied, I come from the seat of enlightenment. I then inquired, what is meant by seat of enlightenment? He then spoke the following words to me, Noble son, the seat of enlightenment is the seat of positive thought because it is without artificiality. It is the seat of effort because it releases energetic activities. It is the seat of high resolve because its insight is superior. It is the seat of the great spirit of enlightenment because it does not neglect anything. It is the seat of generosity because it has no expectation of reward. It is the seat of morality because it fulfills all commitments. It is the seat of tolerance because it is free of anger toward any living being. It is the seat of effort because it does not turn back. It is the seat of meditation because it generates fitness of mind. It is the seat of wisdom because it sees everything directly. It is the seat of love because it is equal to all living beings. It is the seat of compassion because it tolerates all injuries. It is the seat of joy because it is joyfully devoted to the bliss of the Dharma. It is the seat of equanimity because it abandons affection and aversion. It is the seat of paranormal perception because it has the 6 superknowledges. It is the seat of liberation because it does not intellectualize. It is the seat of liberative technique because it develops living beings. It is the seat of the means of unification because it brings together living beings. It is the seat of learning because it makes practice of the essence. It is the seat of interdependent origination because it proceeds from the exhaustion of ignorance to the exhaustion of old age and death. It is the seat of eradication of all passions because it is perfectly enlightened about the nature of reality. It is the seat of all living beings because all living beings are without intrinsic identity. It is the seat of all things because it is perfectly enlightened with regard to voidness. It is the seat of the conquest of all devils because it never flinches. It is the seat of the triple world because it is free of involvement. It is the seat of the heroism that sounds the lion's roar because it is free of fear and trembling. It is the seat of the strengths, the fearlessnesses, and all the special qualities of the Buddha because it is irreproachable in all respects. It is the seat of the 3 knowledges because in it no passions remain. It is the seat of instantaneous total understanding of all things because it realizes fully the gnosis of omniscience. Noble son, when bodhisattvas are thus endowed with the transcendences, the roots of virtue, the ability to develop living beings, and the incorporation of the holy Dharma, whether they lift up their feet or put them down, they all come from the seat of enlightenment. They come from the qualities of the Buddha and stand on the qualities of the Buddha. Lord, when Vimalakirti had explained this teaching, 500 gods and men conceived the spirit of enlightenment, and I became speechless. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the Bodhisattva Jagadamdara, go to the Lakavi Vimalakirti to inquire about his illness. Jagadamdara replied, my lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. Why? Lord, I remember that one day, when I was at home, the wicked Mara, disguised as Indra and surrounded with 12,000 heavenly maidens, approached me with the sounds of music and singing. Having saluted me by touching my feet with his head, he withdrew with his retinue to one side. I then, thinking he was Sakra, the king of the gods, said to him, welcome, O Kausika. You should remain consciously aware in the midst of the pleasures of desire. You should often think on impermanence and strive to utilize the essential in body, life, and wealth. Mara then said to me, good sir, accept from me these 12,000 divine maidens, and make them your servants. I replied, O Kausika, do not offer me, who am religious and a son of the Sakya, things which are not appropriate. It is not proper for me to have these maidens. No sooner had I said these words than the Lakavi Vimalakirti came there and said to me, noble son, do not think that this is Indra. This is not Indra but the evil Mara, who has come to ridicule you. Then the Lakavi Vimalakirti said to Mara, evil Mara, since these heavenly maidens are not suitable for this religious devotee, a son of the Sakya, give them to me. Then Mara was terrified and distressed, thinking that the Lakavi Vimalakirti had come to expose him. He tried to make himself invisible, but, try as he might with all his magical powers, he could not vanish from sight. Then a voice resounded in the sky, saying, evil one, give these heavenly maidens to the good man Vimalakirti, and only then will you be able to return to your own abode. Then Mara was even more frightened and, much against his will, gave the heavenly maidens. The Lakavi Vimalakirti, having received the goddesses, said to them, now that you have been given to me by Mara, you should all conceive the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. He then exhorted them with discourse suitable for their development toward enlightenment, and soon they conceived the spirit of enlightenment. He then said to them, you have just conceived the spirit of enlightenment. From now on, you should devote yourselves to find joy in pleasures of the Dharma, and should take no pleasure in desires. They then asked him, what is joy in the pleasures of the Dharma? He declared, it is the joy of unbreakable faith in the Buddha, of wishing to hear the Dharma, of serving the Sangha and honoring the spiritual benefactors without pride. It is the joy of renunciation of the whole world, of not being fixed in objects, of considering the 5 aggregates to be like murderers, of considering the elements to be like venomous serpents, and of considering the sensimedia to be like an empty town. It is the joy of always guarding the spirit of enlightenment, of helping living beings, of sharing through generosity, of not slackening in morality, of control and tolerance and patience, of thorough cultivation of virtue by effort, of total absorption in meditation, and of absence of passions in wisdom. It is the joy of extending enlightenment, of conquering the maras, of destroying the passions, and of purifying the Buddha field. It is the joy of accumulating all virtues, in order to cultivate the auspicious marks and signs. It is the joy of the liberation of non-intimidation when hearing the profound teaching. It is the joy of exploration of the 3 doors of liberation, and of the realization of liberation. It is the joy of being an ornament of the seat of enlightenment, and of not attaining liberation at the wrong time. It is the joy of serving those of equal fortune, of not hating or resenting those of superior fortune, of serving the spiritual benefactors, and of avoiding sinful friends. It is the joy of the superior gladness of faith and devotion to the Dharma. It is the joy of acquiring liberative techniques, and of the conscious cultivation of the aids to enlightenment. Thus, the Bodhisattva admires and finds joy in the delights of the Dharma. Thereupon, Mara said to the goddesses, "Now come along and let us return home." They said, "You gave us to this householder. Now we should enjoy the delights of the Dharma, and should no longer enjoy the pleasures of desires." Then Mara said to the Lakavi Vimalakirti, "If it is so that the Bodhisattva, the spiritual hero, has no mental attachment, and gives away all his possessions, then, householder, please give me these goddesses." Vimalakirti replied, "They are given, Mara. Go home with your retinue. May you fulfill the religious aspirations of all living beings." Then the goddesses, saluting Vimalakirti, said to him, "Householder, how should we live in the abode of the Maras?" Vimalakirti replied, "Sisters, there is a door of the Dharma called the inexhaustible lamp. Practice it." "What is it?" "Sisters, a single lamp may light hundreds of thousands of lamps without itself being diminished. Likewise, sisters, a single bodhisattva may establish many hundreds of thousands of living beings in enlightenment without his mindfulness being diminished. In fact, not only does it not diminish, it grows stronger. Likewise, the more you teach and demonstrate virtuous qualities to others, the more you grow with respect to these virtuous qualities. This is the door of the Dharma called the inexhaustible lamp. When you are living in the realm of Mara, inspire innumerable gods and goddesses with the spirit of enlightenment. In such a way, you will repay the kindness of the Tathagata, and you will become the benefactors of all living beings." Then, those goddesses bowed at the feet of the Lakavi Vimalakirti and departed in the company of Mara. Thus, Lord, I saw the supremacy of the magical power, wisdom, and eloquence of the Lakavi Vimalakirti, and therefore I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. The Buddha then said to the merchant son, "Sudatta, noble son, go to the Lakavi Vimalakirti to inquire about his illness." Sudatta replied, "Lord, I am indeed reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness." "Why?" "Lord, I remember one day in my father's house when, in order to celebrate a great sacrifice, I was bestowing gifts upon religious devotees, Brahmins, the poor, the wretched, the unfortunate, beggars, and all the needy. On the seventh and final day of this great sacrifice, the Lakavi Vimalakirti came there and said, 'Merchant son, you should not celebrate a sacrifice in this way. You should celebrate a Dharma sacrifice. What is the use of the sacrifice of material things?' I then asked him, 'How does one give a Dharma sacrifice?' He replied, 'A Dharma sacrifice is that which develops living beings without beginning or end, giving gifts to them all simultaneously.' What is that? It consists of the great love which is consummated in enlightenment, of the great compassion which is consummated in the concentration of the holy Dharma on the liberation of all living beings, of the great joy which is consummated in the awareness of the supreme happiness of all living beings, and of the great equanimity which is consummated in concentration through knowledge. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the transcendence of generosity, which is consummated in peacefulness and self-discipline, of the transcendence of morality, which is consummated in the moral development of immoral beings, of the transcendence of tolerance, consummated through the principle of selflessness, of the transcendence of effort, consummated in initiative toward enlightenment, of the transcendence of meditation, consummated in the solitude of body and mind, and of the transcendence of wisdom, consummated in the omniscient gnosis. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the meditation of voidness, consummated in effectiveness in the development of all living beings, of the meditation of signlessness, consummated in the purification of all compounded things, and of the meditation of wishlessness, consummated in voluntarily assuming rebirths. The Dharma sacrifice consists of heroic strength, consummated in the upholding of the holy Dharma, of the power of life, consummated in the means of unification, of the absence of pride, consummated in becoming the slave and the disciple of all living beings, of the gain of body, health, and wealth, consummated by the extraction of essence from the essenceless, of mindfulness, consummated by the 6 remembrances, of positive thought, consummated through the truly enjoyable Dharma, of purity of livelihood, consummated by correct spiritual practice, Of the respect of saints, consummated by joyful and faithful service. Of soberness of mind, consummated by absence of dislike for ordinary people. Of high resolve, consummated by renunciation. Of skill and erudition, consummated by religious practice. Of retirement in solitary retreats, consummated by understanding things free of passions. Of introspective meditation, consummated by attainment of the Buddha gnosis. Of the stage of the practice of yoga, consummated by the yoga of liberating all living beings from their passions. The Dharma sacrifice consists of the store of merit which is consummated by the auspicious signs and marks, the ornaments of the Buddha fields, and all other means of development of living beings. Of the store of knowledge which is consummated in the ability to teach the Dharma according to the thoughts and actions of all living beings. Of the store of wisdom, which is consummated in the uniform gnosis free of acceptance and rejection in regard to all things. Of the store of all roots of virtue, consummated in the abandonment of all passions, obscurations, and unvirtuous things. And of the attainment of all the aids to enlightenment, consummated in the realization of the gnosis of omniscience, as well as an accomplishment of all virtue. That, noble son, is the Dharma sacrifice. The Bodhisattva who lives by this Dharma sacrifice is the best of sacrificers, and, through his extreme sacrifice, is himself worthy of offerings from all people, including the gods. Lord, as soon as the householder had discoursed thus, 200 Brahmins among the crowd of Brahmins present conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. And I, full of astonishment, having saluted this good man by touching his feet with my head, took from around my neck a necklace of pearls worth 100,000 pieces of gold, and offered it to him. But he would not accept it. I then said to him, "Please accept, good man, this necklace of pearls, out of compassion for me, and give it to whomsoever you wish." Then, Vimalakirti took the pearls and divided them into 2 halves. He gave 1/2 of them to the lowliest poor of the city, who had been disdained by those present at the sacrifice. The other half he offered to the Tathagata Dasprasaha. And he performed a miracle such that all present beheld the universe called Marisi and the Tathagata Dasprasaha. On the head of the Tathagata Dasprasaha, the pearl necklace took the form of a pavilion, decorated with strings of pearls, resting on 4 bases, with 4 columns, symmetrical, well constructed, and lovely to behold. Having shown such a miracle, Vimalakirti said, "The giver who makes gifts to the lowliest poor of the city, considering them as worthy of offering as the Tathagata himself, the giver who gives without any discrimination, impartially, with no expectation of reward, and with great love, this giver, I say, totally fulfills the Dharma sacrifice." Then the poor of the city, having seen that miracle and having heard that teaching, conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. Therefore, Lord, I am reluctant to go to that good man to inquire about his illness. In the same way, all the Bodhisattvas, great spiritual heroes, told the stories of their conversations with Vimalakirti, and declared their reluctance to go to him. 5. The consolation of the invalid. Then, the Buddha said to the crown prince, Manjusri, Manjusri, go to the Lakavi Vimalakirti to inquire about his illness. Manjusri replied, Lord, it is difficult to attend upon the Lakavi Vimalakirti. He is gifted with marvelous eloquence concerning the law of the profound. He is extremely skilled in full expressions and in the reconciliation of dichotomies. His eloquence is inexorable, and no one can resist his imperturbable intellect. He accomplishes all the activities of the Bodhisattvas. He penetrates all the secret mysteries of the Bodhisattvas and the Buddhas. He is skilled in civilizing all the abodes of devils. He plays with the great superknowledges. He is consummate in wisdom and liberative technique. He has attained the supreme excellence of the indivisible, non-dual sphere of the ultimate realm. He is skilled in teaching the Dharma with its infinite modalities within the uniform ultimate. He is skilled in granting means of attainment in accordance with the spiritual faculties of all living beings. He has thoroughly integrated his realization with skill and liberative technique. He has attained decisiveness with regard to all questions. Thus, although he cannot be withstood by someone of my feeble defenses, still, sustained by the grace of the Buddha, I will go to him and will converse with him as well as I can. Thereupon, in that assembly, the Bodhisattvas, the great disciples, the Sakras, the Brahmas, the Lokapalas, and the gods and goddesses, all had this thought. Surely the conversations of the young Prince Manjusri and that good man will result in a profound teaching of the Dharma. Thus, 8,000 bodhisattvas, 500 disciples, a great number of Sakras, Brahmas, Lokapalas, and many hundreds of thousands of gods and goddesses, all followed the Crown Prince Manjusri to listen to the Dharma. And the Crown Prince Manjusri, surrounded and followed by these bodhisattvas, disciples, Sakras, Brahmas, Lokapalas, gods and goddesses, entered the great city of Vaisali. Meanwhile, the Lakavi Vimalakirti thought to himself, Manjusri, the Crown Prince, is coming here with numerous attendants. Now, may this house be transformed into emptiness. Then, magically his house became empty. Even the doorkeeper disappeared. And, except for the invalid's couch upon which Vimalakirti himself was lying, no better couch or seat could be seen anywhere. Then, the Lakavi Vimalakirti saw the Crown Prince Manjusri and addressed him thus. Manjusri. Welcome Manjusri. You are very welcome. There you are, without any coming. You appear, without any seeing. You are heard, without any hearing. Manjusri declared, Householder, it is as you say. Who comes, finally comes not. Who goes, finally goes not. Why? Who comes is not known to come. Who goes is not known to go. Who appears is finally not to be seen. Good sir, is your condition tolerable? Is it livable? Are your physical elements not disturbed? Is your sickness diminishing? Is it not increasing? The Buddha asks about you if you have slight trouble, slight discomfort, slight sickness, if your distress is light, if you are cared for, strong, at ease, without self-reproach, and if you are living in touch with the supreme happiness. Householder, whence came this sickness of yours? How long will it continue? How does it stand? How can it be alleviated? Vimalakirti replied, Manjusri, my sickness comes from ignorance and a thirst for existence, and it will last as long as do the sicknesses of all living beings. Were all living beings to be free from sickness, I also would not be sick. Why? Manjusri, for the Bodhisattva, the world consists only of living beings, and sickness is inherent in living in the world. Were all living beings free of sickness, the Bodhisattva also would be free of sickness. For example, Manjusri, when the only son of a merchant is sick, both his parents become sick on account of the sickness of their son. And the parents will suffer as long as that only son does not recover from his sickness. Just so, Manjusri, the Bodhisattva loves all living beings as if each were his only child. He becomes sick when they are sick and is cured when they are cured. You ask me, Manjusri, whence comes my sickness? The sicknesses of the Bodhisattvas arise from great compassion. Manjusri. Householder, why is your house empty? Why have you no servants? Vimalakirti. Manjusri, all Buddha fields are also empty. Manjusri. What makes them empty? Vimalakirti. They are empty because of emptiness. Manjusri. What is empty about emptiness? Vimalakirti. Constructions are empty because of emptiness. Manjusri. Can emptiness be conceptually constructed? Vimalakirti. Even that concept is itself empty, and emptiness cannot construct emptiness. Manjusri. Householder, where should emptiness be sought? Vimalakirti. Manjusri, emptiness should be sought among the 62 convictions. Manjusri. Where should the 62 convictions be sought? Vimalakirti. They should be sought in the liberation of the Tathagatas. Manjusri. Where should the liberation of the Tathagatas be sought? Vimalakirti. It should be sought in the prime mental activity of all living beings. Manjusri, you ask me why I am without servants, but all Maras and opponents are my servants. Why? The Maras advocate this life of birth and death, and the Bodhisattva does not avoid life. The heterodox opponents advocate convictions, and the bodhisattva is not troubled by convictions. Therefore, all Maras and opponents are my servants. Manjusri. Householder, of what sort is your sickness? Vimalakirti. It is immaterial and invisible. Manjusri. Is it physical or mental? Vimalakirti. It is not physical, since the body is insubstantial in itself. It is not mental, since the nature of the mind is like illusion. Manjusri. Householder, which of the four main elements is disturbed: earth, water, fire, or air? Vimalakirti. Manjusri. I am sick only because the elements of living beings are disturbed by sicknesses. Manjusri. Householder, how should a bodhisattva console another bodhisattva who is sick? Vimalakirti. He should tell him that the body is impermanent, but should not exhort him to renunciation or disgust. He should tell him that the body is miserable, but should not encourage him to find solace in liberation, that the body is selfless, but that living beings should be developed, that the body is peaceful, but not to seek any ultimate calm. He should urge him to confess his evil deeds, but not for the sake of absolution. He should encourage his empathy for all living beings on account of his own sickness, his remembrance of suffering experienced from beginningless time, and his consciousness of working for the welfare of living beings. He should encourage him not to be distressed, but to manifest the roots of virtue, to maintain the primal purity and the lack of craving, and thus to always strive to become the king of healers, who can cure all sicknesses. Thus should a bodhisattva console a sick bodhisattva, in such a way as to make him happy. Manjusri asked, Noble sir, how should a sick bodhisattva control his own mind? Vimalakirti replied, Manjusri, a sick bodhisattva should control his own mind with the following consideration. Sickness arises from total involvement in the process of misunderstanding from beginningless time. It arises from the passions that result from unreal mental constructions, and hence ultimately nothing is perceived which can be said to be sick. Why? The body is the issue of the four main elements, and in these elements there is no owner and no agent. There is no self in this body, and except for arbitrary insistence on self, ultimately no I which can be said to be sick can be apprehended. Therefore, thinking I should not adhere to any self, and I should rest in the knowledge of the root of illness, he should abandon the conception of himself as a personality, and produce the conception of himself as a thing, thinking, this body is an aggregate of many things. When it is born, only things are born. When it ceases, only things cease. These things have no awareness or feeling of each other. When they are born, they do not think, I am born. When they cease, they do not think, I cease. Furthermore, he should understand thoroughly the conception of himself as a thing by cultivating the following consideration. Just as in the case of the conception of self, so the conception of thing is also a misunderstanding, and this misunderstanding is also a grave sickness. I should free myself from this sickness and should strive to abandon it. What is the elimination of this sickness? It is the elimination of egoism and possessiveness. What is the elimination of egoism and possessiveness? It is the freedom from dualism. What is freedom from dualism? It is the absence of involvement with either the external or the internal. What is absence of involvement with either external or internal? It is non-deviation, non-fluctuation, and non-distraction from equanimity. What is equanimity? It is the equality of everything from self to liberation. Why? Because both self and liberation are void. How can both be void? As verbal designations, they both are void, and neither is established in reality. Therefore, one who sees such equality makes no difference between sickness and voidness. His sickness is itself voidness, and that sickness as voidness is itself void. The sick bodhisattva should recognize that sensation is ultimately non-sensation, but he should not realize the cessation of sensation. Although both pleasure and pain are abandoned when the Buddha qualities are fully accomplished, there is then no sacrifice of the great compassion for all living beings living in the bad migrations. Thus, recognizing in his own suffering the infinite sufferings of these living beings, the Bodhisattva correctly contemplates these living beings and resolves to cure all sicknesses. As for these living beings, there is nothing to be applied, and there is nothing to be removed. One has only to teach them the Dharma for them to realize the basis from which sicknesses arise. What is this basis? It is object perception. Insofar as apparent objects are perceived, they are the basis of sickness. What things are perceived as objects? The three realms of existence are perceived as objects. What is the thorough understanding of the basic apparent object? It is its non-perception, as no objects exist ultimately. What is non-perception? The internal subject and the external object are not perceived dualistically. Therefore, it is called non-perception. Manjusri, thus should a sick bodhisattva control his own mind in order to overcome old age, sickness, death, and birth. Such, Manjusri, is the sickness of the bodhisattva. If he takes it otherwise, all his efforts will be in vain. For example, one is called hero when one conquers the miseries of aging, sickness, and death. The sick bodhisattva should tell himself, just as my sickness is unreal and non-existent, so the sicknesses of all living beings are unreal and non-existent. Through such considerations, he arouses the great compassion toward all living beings without falling into any sentimental compassion. The great compassion that strives to eliminate the accidental passions does not conceive of any life in living beings. Why? Because great compassion that falls into sentimentally purposive views only exhausts the bodhisattva in his reincarnations. But the great compassion which is free of involvement with sentimentally purposive views does not exhaust the bodhisattva in all his reincarnations. He does not reincarnate through involvement with such views, but reincarnates with his mind free of involvement. Hence, even his reincarnation is like a liberation. Being reincarnated as if being liberated, he has the power and ability to teach the Dharma which liberates living beings from their bondage. As the Lord declares, it is not possible for one who is himself bound to deliver others from their bondage. But one who is himself liberated is able to liberate others from their bondage. Therefore, the bodhisattva should participate in liberation and should not participate in bondage. What is bondage? And what is liberation? To indulge in liberation from the world without employing liberative technique is bondage for the bodhisattva. To engage in life in the world with full employment of liberative technique is liberation for the bodhisattva. To experience the taste of contemplation, meditation, and concentration without skill in liberative technique is bondage. To experience the taste of contemplation and meditation with skill in liberative technique is liberation. Wisdom not integrated with liberative technique is bondage, but wisdom integrated with liberative technique is liberation. Liberative technique not integrated with wisdom is bondage, but liberative technique integrated with wisdom is liberation. How is wisdom not integrated with liberative technique a bondage? Wisdom not integrated with liberative technique consists of concentration on voidness, signlessness, and wishlessness, and yet, being motivated by sentimental compassion, failure to concentrate on cultivation of the auspicious signs and marks, on the adornment of the Buddha field, and on the work of development of living beings, it is bondage. How is wisdom integrated with liberative technique a liberation? Wisdom integrated with liberative technique consists of being motivated by the great compassion, and thus of concentration on cultivation of the auspicious signs and marks, on the adornment of the Buddha field, and on the work of development of living beings, all the while concentrating on deep investigation of voidness, signlessness, and wishlessness, and it is liberation. What is the bondage of liberative technique not integrated with wisdom? The bondage of liberative technique not integrated with wisdom consists of the bodhisattva's planting of the roots of virtue without dedicating them for the sake of enlightenment, while living in the grip of dogmatic convictions, passions, attachments, resentments, and their subconscious instincts. What is the liberation of liberative technique integrated with wisdom? The liberation of liberative technique integrated with wisdom consists of the bodhisattva's dedication of his roots of virtue for the sake of enlightenment, without taking any pride therein, while foregoing all convictions, passions, attachments, resentments, and their subconscious instincts. Manjusri, thus should the Sikh bodhisattva consider things. His wisdom is the consideration of body, mind, and sickness as impermanent, miserable, empty, and selfless. His liberative technique consists of not exhausting himself by trying to avoid all physical sickness, and in applying himself to accomplish the benefit of living beings, without interrupting the cycle of reincarnations. Furthermore, his wisdom lies in understanding that the body, mind, and sickness are neither new nor old, both simultaneously and sequentially. And his liberative technique lies in not seeking cessation of body, mind, or sicknesses. That, Manjusri, is the way a Sikh bodhisattva should concentrate his mind. He should live neither in control of his mind, nor in indulgence of his mind. Why? To live by indulging the mind is proper for fools, and to live in control of the mind is proper for the disciples. Therefore, the bodhisattva should live neither in control nor in indulgence of his mind. Not living in either of the two extremes is the domain of the bodhisattva. Not the domain of the ordinary individual and not the domain of the saint, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the world yet not the domain of the passions, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where one understands liberation, yet does not enter final and complete liberation, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where the four maras manifest, yet where all the works of maras are transcended, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where one seeks the gnosis of omniscience, yet does not attain this gnosis at the wrong time, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where one knows the four holy truths, yet does not realize those truths at the wrong time, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. A domain of introspective insight, wherein one does not arrest voluntary reincarnation in the world, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. A domain where one realizes birthlessness, yet does not become destined for the ultimate, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where one sees relativity without entertaining any convictions, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. Where one associates with all beings, yet keeps free of all afflictive instincts, there is the domain of the bodhisattva. A domain of solitude with no place for the exhaustion of body and mind, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the triple world, yet indivisible from the ultimate realm, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of voidness, yet where one cultivates all types of virtues, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of signlessness, where one keeps in sight the deliverance of all living beings, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of wishlessness, where one voluntarily manifests lives in the world, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. A domain essentially without undertaking, yet where all the roots of virtue are undertaken without interruption, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the six transcendences, where one attains the transcendence of the thoughts and actions of all living beings, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the six superknowledges, wherein defilements are not exhausted, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of living by the holy Dharma, without even perceiving any evil paths, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the four immeasurables, where one does not accept rebirth in the heaven of Brahma, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the six remembrances, unaffected by any sort of defilement, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of contemplation, meditation, and concentration, where one does not reincarnate in the formless realms by force of these meditations and concentrations, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the four right efforts, where the duality of good and evil is not apprehended, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the four bases of magical powers, where they are effortlessly mastered, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of the five spiritual faculties, where one knows the degrees of the spiritual faculties of living beings, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of living with the five powers, where one delights in the 10 powers of the Tathagata, such is the domain of the bodhisattva. The domain of perfection of the 7 factors of enlightenment, where one is skilled in the knowledge of fine intellectual distinctions, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain of the Holy Eightfold Path, where one delights in the unlimited path of the Buddha, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain of the cultivation of the aptitude for mental quiescence and transcendental analysis, where one does not fall into extreme quietism, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain of the realization of the unborn nature of all things, yet of the perfection of the body, the auspicious signs and marks, and the ornaments of the Buddha, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain of manifesting the attitudes of the disciples and the solitary sages without sacrificing the qualities of the Buddha, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain of conformity to all things utterly pure in nature while manifesting behavior that suits the inclinations of all living beings, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. A domain where one realizes that all the Buddha fields are indestructible and uncreatable, having the nature of infinite space, yet where one manifests the establishment of the qualities of the Buddha fields in all their variety and magnitude, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. The domain where one turns the wheel of the holy Dharma and manifests the magnificence of ultimate liberation, yet never forsakes the career of the Bodhisattva, such as the domain of the Bodhisattva. When Vimalakirti had spoken this discourse, 8,000 of the gods in the company of the Crown Prince Manjusri conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. As we conclude this episode, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for your attentive listening. We invite you to seamlessly transition into the next episode of the Vimalakirti Nirdesa Sutra. Your support through likes, shares, and subscriptions serves as a beacon to disseminate Buddha's teachings far and wide, enriching the lives of many. As a helpful reminder, you can access the complete video playlist in the video description, allowing you to continue your enlightening journey. Thank you for your dedication to spreading the wisdom and insights encapsulated in the teachings of Buddha.